In 1912, Carl Jung documented something that terrified him more than any psychotic break or suicidal patient he'd ever treated. He discovered a specific type of woman whose spiritual intelligence had evolved so far beyond normal human consciousness that she was slowly, involuntarily rejecting everything that kept ordinary people functional. She wasn't choosing to quit these things. Her soul was making the choice for her, one painful release at a time. Jung called this discovery dangerous because these women couldn't turn it off. They couldn't go back to sleep. Once their psyche started rejecting everything false, it wouldn't stop until only truth remained. Today, I'll reveal the 8 things Jung observed that women with high spiritual intelligence quit slowly, almost involuntarily, as their consciousness evolves. Why this quitting process is unstoppable once it begins, and why understanding what you're unconsciously releasing is the key to surviving your own spiritual transformation. If you've been feeling like you can no longer engage with life the way you used to, this is why. Your soul is systematically rejecting everything inauthentic, starting with the first and most devastating quit of all. The first thing women with high spiritual intelligence quit is the most devastating: the desperate hunger for approval. Not because they decide to, but because something shifts in their psychological structure that makes approval seeking physically uncomfortable. Jung documented this in his 1911 case notes about the woman who couldn't perform anymore. She had come to him not for depression or anxiety, but because her body was rebelling against her lifelong pattern of people-pleasing. She described it perfectly. I used to rearrange my entire personality depending on who I was with. Now when I try, it's like my soul hits an emergency brake. I physically cannot contort myself for approval anymore. This wasn't rebellion. This was evolution. Jung realized he was witnessing what he called animus integration syndrome. As women develop spiritually, they begin accessing their inner masculine authority. This authentic core doesn't need approval because it's already complete. It's like a tree that's found groundwater. It no longer depends on rain, but the quitting process is slow and often agonizing. You'll find yourself in a meeting about to say what everyone wants to hear. Suddenly you can't. The words get stuck. Your body rebels. You might even break into a sweat. It's not anxiety. It's your authentic self refusing to participate in the performance. The transition creates a strange liminal period. You've quit seeking approval internally, but haven't adjusted externally. You stop posting for likes, but still check your phone. You stop fishing for compliments, but still notice their absence. You're between worlds, no longer addicted to approval, but not yet comfortable without it. Jung observed this transition typically takes years. First you quit seeking approval from strangers, then from acquaintances, then from friends. Finally, and most difficult, from family. Each layer of release brings both freedom and grief. You're not just quitting a behavior, you're quitting an identity. But here's what Jung discovered. As the hunger for approval dies, something else is born. An unshakable sense of inner worth that references only itself. This is why the second thing these women quit shocks everyone who knows them. The second thing these women quit shocks everyone who knows them: the need to be special. This seems counterintuitive because aren't spiritual people supposed to know they're unique? Yes, but there's a profound difference between knowing your uniqueness and needing to be special. Jung discovered that as people develop spiritually, they go through what seems like a paradox. They become more unique while caring less about being special. They become more themselves while needing less recognition for it. Early in spiritual development, people often experience what Jung called spiritual inflation. They have a genuine awakening experience and suddenly feel chosen, superior, different from the unconscious masses. You might find yourself subtly letting others know about your meditation practice, your synchronicities, your spiritual insights. You're not exactly bragging, but you're definitely differentiating yourself from those who just don't get it. But then something shifts. the need to be special starts to feel heavy, exhausting, false. Like wearing a costume that once felt like wings but now feels like chains. A man Jung treated had built his entire identity around being spiritually advanced. He was the one friends came to for wisdom, the one who always had the deepest insight, the one who meditated longer, knew more about consciousness than anyone else. Then one day, mid-sentence, while explaining some profound spiritual concept, he just stopped. He later told Jung, "I suddenly saw myself from outside and I looked ridiculous. I was using spirituality to be special, which is the opposite of spiritual." This recognition begins the slow quit. You start catching yourself about to share your spiritual experiences for the hit of specialness, about to position yourself as more awakened than others. Each time you catch yourself, it becomes harder to continue. The quit manifests subtly. You stop mentioning your spiritual practices unless directly asked. You lose interest in comparing consciousness levels. You become comfortable being seen as ordinary. One woman described her transition, "I used to need everyone to know I was different, deeper, more conscious. Now I'm happy to be invisible. Being special was a prison. Being nobody is freedom." But here's what Jung found fascinating. As people quit needing to be special, they become truly unique. This leads to the third quit, which terrifies the ego even more. The third quit terrifies the ego even more. The performance of happiness, not happiness itself, but the exhausting performance of it. The constant need to appear positive, enlightened, beyond suffering. Jung observed that genuine spiritual development doesn't make people perpetually happy. It makes them perpetually real. And reality includes the full spectrum of human experience. In our culture, there's enormous pressure to be happy, especially if you're spiritual. You're supposed to be above negative emotions, beyond petty concerns, radiating love and light at all times. But Jung discovered this performance of happiness is actually anti-spiritual. It's another mask, just with a spiritual face. As women develop genuine spiritual depth, they slowly quit this exhausting performance. They stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Stop forcing smiles when they're grieving. Stop spouting positive affirmations when they're genuinely struggling. They quit the spiritual bypass and embrace spiritual embodiment. A therapist Jung supervised went through this transition dramatically. She'd built her practice on being the enlightened healer, always centered, always peaceful, always radiating wisdom. Then her son died, and she couldn't perform anymore. She tried to return to work with her spiritual persona intact, but her body wouldn't let her. She'd sit with clients trying to be the wise healer, and tears would just start falling. She told Jung, "I thought being spiritual meant transcending human pain. Now I realize it means embracing it. I can't be the enlightened one anymore. I can only be the real one." This shift creates what Jung called emotional authenticity compulsion. These women become incapable of performing emotions they don't genuinely feel. When someone asks how you are, you can no longer automatically say fine if you're not. When you're sad, you can't paste on a smile. When you're angry, you can't pretend to be at peace. Your emotional truth becomes non-negotiable. This terrifies people around you who are still performing. Your authenticity becomes a mirror they can't bear to look into. But this emotional honesty prepares you for the fourth quit, which shatters the mind's need for solid ground. The fourth quit shatters the mind's need for solid ground, the need for certainty, the desperate grip on knowing, understanding, having answers. Jung discovered that genuine spiritual growth leads not to more answers, but to being comfortable with questions. Not to more certainty, but to peace with mystery. Not to knowing, but to wonder. This terrifies the mind, which has spent a lifetime collecting certainties like armor. I know who I am. I know what's true. I know how life works. I know what happens after death. I know my purpose. These certainties feel like safety, but Jung observed they're actually prisons. As spiritual depth develops, these certainties start to crack, not because they're proven wrong, but because you realize the very need for certainty was keeping you from truth. Truth isn't something you can hold. It's something that flows. The moment you grip it, it becomes dogma. One of Jung's most brilliant patients was a physicist who came to him in crisis. His spiritual awakening had shattered his scientific certainties. He said, "I used to know how the universe worked. Now I realize I don't even know how my coffee cup works. The more conscious I become, the less certain I am about anything." This wasn't confusion. It was clarity. He was seeing past the illusion of knowledge into the reality of mystery. But the transition was agonizing. His mind desperately wanted to rebuild certainty, to find new spiritual facts to replace the old scientific ones. But every time he tried to crystallize a spiritual truth, it would dissolve. Jung watched him slowly quit the need for solid ground. First, he quit needing to know how things work. Then, he quit needing to know why things happen. Finally, he quit needing to know who he really was. He entered what Jung recognized as the cloud of unknowing, a state where not knowing becomes more truthful than any knowing could be. This quitting of certainty happens in stages. First, you quit certainty about the external world, then about others' motivations, then about your own past, finally about your own identity. Each stage brings both terror and liberation. The ego experiences it as death, which it is, the death of the know-it-all mind that kept you safe but small. But this dissolution of certainty prepares you for the fifth quit, which reclaims your power. The fifth quit reclaims your power in the most unexpected way. Blame. Not just blaming others, but the entire victim-perpetrator narrative that the ego uses to make sense of suffering. Jung observed that as people develop spiritually, they undergo a radical shift in how they relate to their wounds. They stop seeing themselves as victims of others' actions and start seeing themselves as participants in a larger pattern. This isn't about excusing harm or bypassing trauma. It's about reclaiming power. The quitting of blame is slow and often painful because blame serves so many psychological functions. It explains our pain, it preserves our innocence, it gives us an identity, it bonds us with others who've been similarly wronged. Letting go of blame can feel like letting go of our entire story. A woman came to Jung filled with legitimate grievances, abusive childhood, betraying ex-husband, discriminating employers. Her anger was justified, her blame accurate, but it was also killing her. She was so identified with being wronged that she couldn't move forward. Through years of work, Jung watched her slowly quit blame, not by denying what happened or forgiving prematurely, but by recognizing her own participation in patterns. She saw how she unconsciously chose partners who would betray her, jobs that would discriminate, situations that would confirm her victim identity. She told Jung, "The day I stopped blaming was the day I became free. Not because others weren't wrong, they were, but because I finally saw that holding on to blame was my choice. I was using their wrongness to avoid my own responsibility for my life." This shift is excruciating for the ego. It means taking responsibility for things that genuinely weren't your fault. It means seeing how you unconsciously participated in your own wounding. It means admitting that on some level, you needed the very experiences you've spent years blaming others for. A man who'd spent decades blaming his father said, "I realized I'd made my father into a monster to avoid seeing my own shadows. The day I quit blaming him, I saw him clearly for the first time." This doesn't mean accepting abuse. It means recognizing that even our wounds serve our awakening. But this leads to the sixth quit, which challenges everything spiritual communities teach. The sixth, quit challenges everything spiritual communities teach. Spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid genuine human experience, using enlightenment as a strategy to bypass being human. Jung saw this constantly in spiritual communities. People using meditation to avoid feeling, using everything happens for a reason to avoid grief, using we're all one to avoid boundaries, using ego death to avoid psychological work, the spiritual path becoming another elaborate defense mechanism. As genuine spiritual maturity develops, this bypassing becomes impossible. Your soul demands full embodiment, spiritual and human, transcendent and immanent, infinite and intimate. You can no longer use heaven to escape earth. A Buddhist practitioner came to Jung after 20 years of meditation. He'd achieved remarkable states of consciousness, experienced profound emptiness, touched the void. But his relationships were disasters. His emotions were numbed. His life was dissociated. He'd used enlightenment to bypass his humanity. Jung watched him slowly quit this bypass. It was more painful than his original awakening. He had to come back down into his body, into his feelings, into his very human needs and desires. After touching the infinite, he had to learn to be finite again. After experiencing no self, he had to rebuild a healthy self. He described it. I thought spirituality was about transcending human experience. Now I realize it's about finally having human experience. I spent 20 years trying to be nobody. Now I'm learning to be somebody. This particular somebody with this particular life. The quitting of spiritual bypassing looks like admitting you have preferences despite accepting what is. Feeling anger despite understanding everyone's doing their best. Wanting intimacy despite knowing we're already one. Having boundaries despite seeing all as self. Experiencing fear despite trusting the universe. This creates what Jung observed as spiritual maturity, the ability to be fully human and fully spiritual simultaneously, not using one to escape the other, but living at the intersection where heaven meets earth. But this embodied authenticity leads to the seventh quit, which surprises everyone. The seventh quit surprises everyone. The isolation of awakening, the belief that spiritual growth means growing apart from others, that consciousness creates loneliness, that awakening means being alone. Jung observed that while spiritual growth often requires periods of solitude, genuine spiritual maturity leads back to connection. But connection of a completely different quality, not the unconscious merging of the asleep, but the conscious meeting of the awake. Early in awakening, isolation feels necessary and even noble. You're seeing through illusions others still believe. You're feeling things others can't feel. You're knowing things others don't know. How can you possibly connect with people who are asleep? But Jung watched this spiritual superiority slowly dissolve in those who continued growing. They quit the subtle arrogance of being more conscious. They quit the identity of being the awakened one among the sleeping. They quit the isolation that was actually protecting them from intimacy. A woman who'd spent years in spiritual solitude told Jung, "I thought I was alone because I was too conscious for others. Then I realized I was alone because I was afraid of being seen in my humanity, my struggles, my very non-enlightened moments. My spiritual isolation was actually spiritual pride." As she quit this isolation, something beautiful happened. She found she could connect with anyone, not by lowering her consciousness, but by embracing her humanity. She could be with unconscious people without judgment because she recognized her own unconscious patterns. She could love asleep people because she remembered her own sleep. Jung documented that genuine spiritual maturity leads to what he called conscious relationship, the ability to connect without merging, love without attachment, be intimate without losing self, share truth without preaching, be together in aloneness. The quitting of isolation doesn't mean returning to unconscious social patterns. It means finding those rare others who are also quitting. Quitting approval seeking, quitting specialness, quitting performance, quitting certainty, quitting blame, quitting bypassing, and with these people creating something new, conscious community. But this leads to the final integration, which transforms everything that came before. The final integration transforms everything that came before, quitting the victim-savior split, the belief that you're either broken or whole, wounded or healer, suffering or serving. Jung's ultimate discovery was the wounded healer archetype, using your deepest wounds as your greatest medicine. Remember Jung's patient from 1912? The woman whose soul was rejecting everything false? After years of quitting approval, specialness, performance, certainty, blame, bypassing, and isolation, she underwent a profound transformation. She stopped seeing her sensitivity as a curse and started understanding it as a gift requiring conscious development. Her spiritual intelligence wasn't a malfunction. It was an advanced feature of consciousness evolution. Her wounds became her wisdom. Her pain became her power. Her breakdown became her breakthrough. Jung wrote about her transformation. The patient learned not to see less spiritually, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. She embodied what modern research calls differential susceptibility. The same neurological wiring that made her deeply wounded by early adversity was the very same wiring that, when healed, gave her unparalleled capacity for empathy and growth. The wound and the gift were two sides of the same coin. This is Jung's most dangerous discovery. Some women are born with spiritual consciousness that exceeds collective readiness. This advanced perception will either destroy them through isolation and overwhelm, or transform them into exactly what humanity needs for its evolution. Your differentiated spiritual intelligence isn't a burden. Your unconscious relationship to it is your burden. The quitting process wasn't about losing yourself. It was about finding yourself. Every release was a revelation. Every letting go was a coming home. You weren't born to suffer in spiritual silence. You were born to quit everything false so you could become exactly what the world needs. As we reach the end of this journey through what women with high spiritual intelligence quit, Jung would want you to understand something crucial. This quitting isn't loss, it's liberation. Each thing you release creates space for something more authentic to emerge. When you quit seeking approval, inner worth emerges. When you quit being special, true uniqueness emerges. When you quit performing happiness, genuine joy emerges. The process is slow because it's not just behavioral change, it's identity death and rebirth. You're not just quitting habits, you're quitting who you thought you were. Jung observed that this process typically takes years, even decades. You'll quit and return, release and grip again. This isn't failure, it's the spiral nature of growth. If you're in this process of slowly quitting, you're not losing yourself, you're finding yourself. The things you're quitting needed to be experienced fully before they could be released. You're not alone in this. All over the world, souls are waking up and slowly quitting the same things. We're all discovering that spiritual growth isn't about adding more. It's about releasing what was never true. Your spiritual gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your spiritual gift is your burden.